A short time ago, the United States military began major combat operations in Iran. Our objective is to defend the American people by eliminating imminent threats.
Today, a lot of Americans heard the same thing and felt the same jolt. Did the president just start a war without Congress? And there's a second important question. Can a U.S. president order a strike that kills a foreign head of state? Those aren't partisan questions, they're constitutional ones. When force is used abroad, the real issue isn't just whether it was wise, it's who had the authority to decide. I'm Charles Jung, Stanford trained litigator, former SF bar president, no spin. Let's walk through what the Constitution and the law actually require. I'm going to answer 5 questions from a legal perspective and without hype. 1, was this lawful under the Constitution and U.S. law? Second, what is Congress supposed to do here? Third, can the president order the killing of Iran's supreme leader? 4, was this legal under international law? And 5, what can Americans do if they're concerned? First, was the strike lawful under the Constitution and U.S. law? Start with the design. The Constitution splits war powers. Congress has the power to declare war. That's Article 1, Section 8. The President is Commander-in-Chief. Article 2, Section 2. That split is intentional. Speed on one side, consent on the other. So where does a sudden strike fit? The best way to understand it is a Supreme Court framework from Youngstown. Presidential power rises or falls based on what Congress has done. If Congress authorizes force, the president is on the strongest footing. If Congress clearly forbids it, the president is on the weakest footing. If Congress hasn't spoken clearly, things get murky. Right now, there's no specific new authorization for war with Iran. So the president's legal theory is basically, I can act under Article 3 of the Constitution to address an imminent threat. That claim can be legally defensible in limited situations, especially when the executive said, there's no time. But legality doesn't freeze on day one. It changes with scale and duration. If this becomes a sustained campaign, the Constitution expects Congress to own the decision to continue it. And that's why the next piece matters. Second, what is the role of Congress? Congress is not supposed to be a commentator. Congress is supposed to be a decision maker. Under federal law, the War Powers Resolution, if U.S. forces are introduced into hostilities, the president must send Congress a report within 48 hours. And there's a 60-day clock unless Congress authorizes continuation. In practice, Congress has 2 levers that matter. Authorization, a vote that says, yes, here's the legal basis. Funding, the power of the purse. No money, no sustained operation. And this is the real world experience. Congress often hesitates because recorded votes carry political risk. Nobody wants sole ownership if things go badly. And you don't have to agree with that as a value statement to recognize it as a pattern. So here's what to watch. Will Congress hold a real vote on authorization? Will Congress place boundaries in appropriations? Or will it issue statements while the operation continues? That's the difference between a live check and a symbolic one. Question 3, can the president lawfully order the killing of Iran's supreme leader? Now, that's the hardest question. It's now been confirmed that the supreme leader was killed. What does U.S. law say about whether this was legal? Domestically, the big issue is Executive Order 12333. It bars U.S. personnel from engaging in assassination. But here's the reality. That term isn't tightly defined in the order, and executive branch lawyers have long drawn a distinction. A political killing outside armed conflict is prohibited. Targeting enemy leadership during armed conflict or in claimed self-defense can be treated as a lawful military strike. That doesn't make it automatically legal. It means the legal fight turns on classification. Are we in an armed conflict? Is this framed as self-defense against an imminent threat? Is the target treated as directing military operations? And yes, targeting a head of state also raises international law stakes and escalation risk. Even if a domestic theory exists, the global legal scrutiny intensifies. So let's talk question 4. Was this legal under international law? International law starts with a bright rule. Under the UN Charter, states generally can't use force against another state, Article 2.4. The main exception is self defense, Article 51. So the legal hinge becomes, was there an armed attack? Or, if not, was there a truly imminent threat that justified anticipatory self defense? That's where the classic Caroline standard matters. Necessity must be overwhelming, leaving no choice of means and no moment for deliberation. And here's the tension. Large scale operations often look like they required planning. That can be hard to reconcile with no moment for deliberation, unless the imminence evidence is truly compelling. Also, if objectives start to look like regime change, proportionality gets harder to defend. So, internationally, it comes down to evidence. What was the threat? How immediate was it? Could it have been addressed another way? Was the response limited to neutralizing that threat? If the imminence claim is weak, the legality claim weakens with it. Finally, question 5. What can Americans do if they believe this was illegal? If you believe that a constitutional line was crossed, the question is, who enforces that? Here's a sober answer. War powers disputes are notoriously difficult to resolve in court. Federal courts often treat them as political questions unless Congress has clearly taken a position and the executive has defied it. So litigation is possible, but historically it's rarely decisive in the early stages of a conflict. That means enforcement doesn't usually begin in the judiciary. It begins in Congress. If you believe the strike was unlawful, the most legally meaningful actions are through pressuring your members of Congress. First, demand a recorded vote on authorization. The Constitution gives Congress the power to declare war. If members believe this exceeded Article 2 authority, they can say so in binding form. Second, demand clarity on funding. Under Article 1, Congress controls appropriations. If lawmakers conclude the operation lacks legal basis, they can refuse to fund its expansion or continuation. Those are more than symbolic steps. They are constitutional tools. There's a third layer as well. Demand transparency. The administration is claiming imminent threat under Article 2 or Article 51 of the UN Charter. Ask for the legal memorandum or classified briefing summaries that explain that conclusion. Congress has oversight authority for a reason. So if you believe this crossed a legal line, the path is not just noise, it's pressure for a vote, a funding decision, oversight hearings grounded in evidence. The Constitution's enforcement mechanism is not automatic. It relies on institutional response, and citizens influence that response through political accountability. That's how your concern can become constitutional action. So, was Operation Epic Fury legal? There is a constitutional theory that supports it. If the strike was limited, if the threat was truly imminent, and if Congress now does its job. But the Constitution doesn't run on theories. It runs on participation. If Congress votes, sets boundaries, and uses its funding authority, the system is working, even under stress. If Congress avoids the vote and lets it ride, power shifts, not loudly, not dramatically, but permanently. That's the part people miss. The real test isn't what the president said, it's what Congress does next, and whether the evidence for imminence is ever put on the record. That's how rule of law works, not by rhetoric, by accountability. If you care about whether those guardrails are real, stay with us. That's what we examine here.